Let's talk about the forms of imperfective and perfective verbs and how you can sometimes recognize which aspect is which. But before we get to that, let's do a quick review of the basic meaning of the two aspects. In our first video on this, we talked about how Russian verbs come in pairs with two aspects, imperfective and perfective. We saw that the perfective expresses completion and result, and it's used with one-time actions. The imperfective, on the other hand, is used for repeated actions, when the focus is on duration, when we're describing an action as something not completed or in progress, and when completion just isn't relevant. But what about the forms of the two aspects? What do they look like? Well, we've got about 4 basic patterns for the forms of imperfective and perfective pairs. Let's take them one at a time. One really common pattern is when you add a prefix to the imperfective to get a perfective. For example, imperfective читать corresponds to the perfective прочитать. Imperfective писать corresponds to the perfective написать. Imperfective ужинать has the perfective поужинать. So for all of these, the perfective has the prefix, while the imperfective does not. Unfortunately, you can't really predict which prefix you'll need to get the perfective for a given imperfective. For example, we just saw a few common perfectives with different prefixes, pro, na, po, etc. And when you come to a more advanced stage, you'll see that you can even add different prefixes to a given verb for additional shades of meaning. It's a very flexible and subtle and expressive system, but at the beginning, I think you'll just want to concentrate on one pair at a time. What's an infix? Well, if a prefix is something that you put at the beginning of a word, an infix is something that you put in the middle of the word. And the one that you'll see most often is uv. So, if we take the perfective заказать, we can put uv right in the middle to get the imperfective заказывать, заказывать. Notice here that we're using the perfective as our starting point. And a few more examples. Perfective рассказать, imperfective рассказывать. Perfective показать, imperfective показывать. Sometimes the two aspects will be distinguished not by prefixes or infixes, but by changes in the stem or the ending, often a single vowel near the ending. For example, there's imperfective решать and perfective решить. Sometimes a consonant at the end of the stem will change too, as in the imperfective отвечать and perfective ответить. And take special care with this pair, imperfective покупать, perfective купить. Besides that the vowels are different, there is something odd about this one. The imperfective has the prefix по. So, покупать, купить, to buy, is an important exception to the rule that it's normally the perfective that has the prefix. And finally, we have a few pairs that don't really fall in any of the first 3 groups. There may be a relationship that's become less clear because of sound changes in the history of the language, like imperfective начинать, perfective начать. And sometimes the two aspects are formed from completely different roots. For example, there's imperfective брать, perfective взять, imperfective говорить, perfective сказать. And the not-so-good news here is that although the patterns of the first 3 groups may help, there's no perfectly reliable way to predict the imperfective if you know the perfective. And if you know the imperfective, there's no way to be sure what the perfective is without asking your teacher or checking a dictionary. So the best and simplest advice I can give is to just take it one pair at a time. As you learn new vocabulary, be sure to stick with the good habit of always learning both aspects of the verb. Summing up, while you can't predict what an imperfective-perfective pair will look like, there are some patterns that will help you recognize this relationship. Perhaps the most common pattern is that of prefixes. The perfective is formed by adding a prefix to the imperfective. Sometimes we add an infix to the perfective to derive the imperfective, as in показывать, показать. And sometimes you'll see stem changes or a different vowel in the ending of the infinitive of the two aspects. And with a few important verbs, the two aspects will look completely different, as in брать, взять, or говорить, сказать.